everybody. Welcome to Rachel's Reviews. We're really excited today to be here. We have a very special episode of our independent animation showcase that we have. And this is kind of a follow-up to what we did in January, where we talked about the Puppetoon movie. And we have a very special guest here. And I'm film critic Rachel Wagner, and Stanford's here.
Hey, hi.
Yes, and we have as our guest director, producer, and screenwriter Arnold Leibovit. And Arnold, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah. So why don't you introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners and tell us a little bit about your career and who you are.
Where do I start? Childbirth?
Please. Yeah.
What inspired you to get into animation and producing, directing, all of these things?
Well, growing up, like a lot of kids, I was inspired by fantasy, science fiction, and fantasy. Walt Disney, who I met in later years, George Powell, who I also met, and a number of people, Ray Harryhausen. There were a number of key people that influenced me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, and it's sort of unbelievable that I would end up, having connection and actually get to know some of these people in real life, having grown up to seeing their projects. There's so many markers in my life that influenced me, but no question that Walt Disney, Cecil B. DeMille, George Powell, Ray Harryhausen influenced my interest in becoming involved in film, and I think that's really what drove me to want to make films, and so that's sort of where it began. And then I started to do films in college. I did short subjects. I did a number of films back then. Penny Lane is one of the more notable film I made on toy mechanical banks. And that was in 1975. And I worked on a lot of feature films. I did a lot of editing and work in New York on films, and back and forth between New York and Los Angeles. I think going to UCLA was really helpful because it got me out to where I needed to be making films and we're doing projects. And I think more than anything else, George Powell was the life changer for me. Meeting him when I was living in LA, I was working on a science fiction fantasy project. And it was suggested that I go see George Powell. And of course, I didn't know he was still around at that point. And so my friend Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Alien, by the way, he and a couple of other people had introduced me to George. They thought he would be good for my project. And that's how I met him. And that was a life-changing moment for me. I had no idea that it would turn into what became, but I think he touched me very, very strongly. And when he passed away a year or so later, it did hit me pretty hard. And I became friends with Mrs. Powell. And I called her up. I was actually back in Miami at that point. And I said, we really should do something for George. And it was a few years later that I put together the idea of doing a film about his life. And it was called The Fantasy Film Worlds of George Powell. That was in 1985. And that was a somewhat of a seminal film on the career of Powell. And it introduced me to the movie industry in a big way, because we premiered it at the Motion Picture Academy. Everyone that was involved in Powell's career was there. And of course, as many of you may or may not know who George Powell is, he's most well known for well, the film that's behind me as a poster, The Time Machine, and War of the Worlds, and films in the fantasy science fiction field in the 1950s. And Powell was known as the father of science fiction and fantasy in modern film. And he influenced just about everybody in the movie industry. Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Peter Jackson, Tim Burton, anyone who's making films today and during this whole period have been influenced by Powell, both in terms of his special effects, science fiction, and his animation. So that's what made the connection to Powell so noteworthy, because I had no idea the totality of the connection between the industry and George Powell, not realizing how influential he was and helped the careers of so many people in the movie industry, whether it was an animator like Ray Harryhausen, or a friend, Walter Lantz, or Walt Disney, or Cecil B. DeMille, who he worked to make War of the Worlds and When Worlds Collide, and in animation people from all the studios. It's just a ripple effect of so many people. So that is the most important part of this whole story for me.
You know, Arnie, it's so great to get to talk with you. We've been talking a bit, you know, over the past few months, trying to get this schedule. So I'm thrilled that we finally get to do this. And what really brought all of us together is I attribute it to Turner Classic Movies, because I was watching a George Powell retrospective on TCM, because I love TCM, as Rachel knows. You know, it's like my favorite TV network and or channel. And they showed the Time Machine, which I've seen multiple times, and it's a great film. And then they showed the Puppetoon movie, and thankfully I recorded it on my DVR, because, you know, Rachel has been kind enough to include me on her podcast for a while, particularly with this obscure animation series that she does. And I just, you know, messaged her and said, Rachel, you need to come watch this, because it's just so interesting, you know, just because I had never seen it, you know, seen the likes of it. And so, you know, Rachel and I watched it, and we put together our podcast, and then thankfully however you saw it, Arnie, we're grateful, you know, that you came across our podcast. And I think, you know, we strive for accuracy, but we made some errors, or we were, you know, unintentionally on the podcast. And of course, Arnie, we're sorry about that. That was never our intention.
No, of course.
But I'm thrilled that you would, you know, be willing to come on and talk through some of it with both the Puppetoon movie, and then of course we want to hear more about your career and some also really cool future projects that you've got.
Yeah, this is back in January, and it was a little bit different than our typical episode of the podcast, because it was more of a instant response kind of a thing, because normally I'll watch it and then I'll get all my notes all together and then we'll talk about it. But since we were watching over at Stanford's house and we were together, it was kind of we watched it and then we recorded our response. So it was a little bit different than maybe our typical episodes. So that's my only excuse for maybe if we got a few things more wrong than we might typically get wrong. So I do apologize about that, but I'm glad that you agreed to come on and talk with us. And it's, you know, we love finding these independent, underrated animated films that deserve more attention, and we try to give it to them on our little podcast. We do. So it's really fun. Hey, did you always have an interest in animation growing up? Did you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, right from the beginning. I think part of it is almost the way Powell viewed it as well. He started animation, but it kind of merged with special effects. The idea of, and today you see that, and it's become the star of films basically. And Powell was the pioneer in this, where special effects became the real key moments of movies. And those techniques that are used in special effects come from animation. The animation style, stop motion animation, which is what George was really almost, he didn't invent it, but he certainly augmented it in a big way with his style of animation. And that style of animation is the forerunners of a lot of special effects, which is time-lapse photography, frame by frame animation, which is now morphed today in CGI and all the things we see, which are stem from a lot of the work that Powell did and influenced all those people that made those films. Interesting, Stan mentioned TCM. The night that he recorded the Puppetoon movie on TCM, I was on TCM.
Yeah, I was going to say you were on, and I don't think we got the intro on the ground, but I saw it, because I saw it live. Yeah, I don't think I got to share that with Rachel. But
I mean, I did. They invited me. I did a it was a two night or 4 night. We've done a lot of these. I can't remember. I've done quite a few of these at different places, but it was basically a 2-night tribute. I was on with Ben Mankiewicz, and I co-hosted 4 segments basically.
You were there in their Atlanta studio, weren't you, Arnie?
I know we did it in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
Not too far from Paramount.
Okay.
They have two locations. One is in Atlanta, and the other is in Hollywood. And a lot of people, actors, don't want to go to Atlanta, or it's closer for them.
So they've got a setup they can do it there in Los Angeles.
Exactly. And so we did it in Los Angeles, and it got quite a viewership. Quite a lot of people tuned in and watched it. I'm actually, I'm taken by the fact that you saw it and that you taped it, and it's, to me, it's remarkable, really, the reach that it is, because that's the perfect place to see it, of course.
Yes.
And I'm a huge fan of classic cinema.
Yeah.
So that meant a great deal to me. I've also been at the festival as well. The TCM
yes,
festival.
In fact, I was so sad because I was hoping to get to see you at the festival this year, which got canceled.
Yeah,
as everything else has this year.
There will be another opportunity.
Yes,
it will definitely be with the Puppetoons that we're going to be talking about, or other feature films related to it. But I don't know how long it's going to be. They expect to have one next year, but I'm not so sure.
Yeah,
I think it depends on vaccine.
Yeah.
If we get a vaccine, I think then, I mean, especially something like that where there's going to be a lot of seniors and people like that, then they have to be extra careful.
Well, and then plus they typically do it in April, and I just kind of think anything first or second quarter next year. I don't know. I'm just not optimistic about it. But
I'm not too optimistic, and none of my friends are.
I wish.
It's a big risk.
So I think you mentioned it, but just a reminder, how did you meet George Powell?
I was doing a film. I was developing this project. It was a Jaws on land idea that I came up with. It was a monster movie, really. And it took place on land instead of in the water. And it involved special effects. It actually was the influence of other films like Tremors and things like that. But I was going to use stop motion animation and special effects, and it was suggested I see George. So I met him at his house in Beverly Hills, and that's how we met. And it was something that I was proposing that he get involved in the project, and he had his suggestions, and I had said, well, maybe we can get Rod Taylor to be in it, and sure, we could get Rod, but it was sort of beginning of of an interesting series of conversations. But he didn't live much longer, unfortunately.
Yeah, you said it was a year or so after you had met him that he passed away.
He
Yeah.
passed away. It was it's a bad year for me. My father passed away at the beginning of the year in January, and George passed away like a couple of months after.
Oh dear.
And and it was really very sad for me.
Yeah.
But I was able to stay in touch with Mrs. Powell, and that's sort of how it kind of developed. But things don't happen just like that. I mean, I had this idea in my head, like I wanted to do something. It was almost 3 or 4 years later that I was able to actually put that project together, and then I came out to LA and I did
put that documentary together. The
fantasy film
the
world.
fantasy film world. Okay, yeah.
And that showed before, when you were watching TCM.
Yeah,
the fantasy
that was
film
before.
world was first. Mm-hmm. And that film's very important. I actually think that's the more important film, because it covers the whole epic story of George and everything about him. And of course, that project also has all the people and many of the people that worked with George that I got to know, that starred in his movies, technical people, Charlton Heston, Rod Taylor, Alan Young, Tony Curtis, Janet Leigh, Ray Harryhausen. There's about 35 people involved in the project that are quite notable. They were all notable people. Most of them have passed away now. And it was really a who's who of the industry. And it was quite extraordinary, really. Almost unbelievable. It's a miracle. The whole thing is it's a miracle, the way it all came together and all the people involved. There isn't a person that each individual person was as significant an influence in the world of film or science fiction or fantasy or special effects. Each one unto themselves was had notoriety among every one of them. Where Ray Bradbury and Robert Bloch and all the different people. It was almost like the whole industry. It's quite amazing, and that's part of the epic aspects of this story. And the Puppetoons are the kind of the tipping or the apex.
Yes.
Stage.
So Arnie, so your next project was the Puppetoon movie, which was released in 1987, right? And one of the things that really struck me about it, and I think it was probably one of the many things, or one of the things that we were getting kind of wrong in our original podcast, which of course brought us together, but was the introduction and the ending of those films were very interesting, in that you did a lot of new stop motion animation for those.
Yeah.
And these were characters that that I've learned from our conversations that we've had over the past few months, that were not necessarily George Powell's creations, but they were definitely inspired by him.
Exactly.
And so I think that's where we I know we weren't completely right about that, but could you describe about the beginning, those bookends of the Puppetoon movie, and really because there's some really cool stuff that you were able to do for that I just don't think as film watchers there, just watching it there on TCM, that we just didn't know.
Yeah.
Well, and again, that was very ambitious.
Oh, absolutely.
It was very ambitious to do that, and that's been commented by a number of people. Most people don't do things like that. I thought it was important to give a framework to George Powell so that people could understand, kind of the way you can tell I describe it, to give a context to the significance of this body of work that he did. And so I thought to myself, well, who's the most well-known stop motion character even today? And it has to be Gumby. I mean, Gumby is the most well-known, and still is, even now, the most well-known. And he's not even an armature puppet. He's a clay puppet, but it's stop motion animation. So I called Art Clokey, who I became friends with, who created Gumby, and I said, would it be possible if I could use Gumby to introduce George in this Puppetoon movie? And of course, as the story goes with so many of the people that I talked to in the industry, this story that he told me was not different from many stories, but he said, of course, if it wasn't for the Puppetoons, I would never have created Gumby. So that's the story that goes on and on and on, the ripple effect. It's so the people that worked on Gumby ended up becoming animators on the Puppetoon movie. Peter Kleinow, who animated Gumby, animated the sequence. Gene Warren Jr., who was the camera and did the sequence direction. Father did the special effects for the Time Machine. The camera that we used to shoot the sequence is the same camera that was used to shoot the special effects in the Time Machine.
Yeah, I love that. That's just the coolest thing. When you told me that, I thought, oh God, yeah.
I mean, it's so there's so many connections, and that's the set. Now, we'll talk about this later, but there's an extra on the new Blu-ray coming out where we actually shot on the set, and you can actually see the document of what was actually happening. That was done by Miles Laboratories. We did Speedy Alka-Seltzer, which was one of many influenced puppets from George Powell.
Was this the only time that Gumby was in a film, or because he seems like he was mostly television?
He was.
I could
no,
be
they
wrong
did a
about
Gumby.
that.
They did a Gumby movie after that.
Oh, okay.
It was the first. It was probably the first time. It was the first time it was shot in widescreen. Of course, Speedy Alka-Seltzer was shot in color, which had never been done before. It's a colorful puppet, but was always black and white.
And where was the puppet again, Arnie? Where was the Speedy Alka-Seltzer puppet found?
Well, that was a story in
Sorry,
itself.
in and of itself.
The puppet was just completely lost, and Miles Laboratories made this remarkable discovery. The puppet was found in Australia, the series head, because it isn't just one puppet; it's a series of puppets. That's what the George Powell technique is. It's a series of different heads, different legs, different bodies, replaced each frame of film. The remarkable story of what the series puppet that George Powell invented, which we can talk about as we go further.
Yes.
And that's what Speedy represents. So they were thrilled. I mean, when they found out I was doing this, Miles Laboratory that makes all these drugs like Bayer and all these things at the time, they came to Hollywood and they documented this event of seeing Speedy being animated live action in real time. I mean, and the Smithsonian was they were so interested in this because it was a historic event. They came too. So the Smithsonian and Miles was there. And it's now part of the Smithsonian Institution. The whole episode, the documenting of it, it's all at the Smithsonian now.
Isn't so that Speedy puppet isn't it part of the Smithsonian collection? I think I saw it.
Yeah.
At the American History Museum.
I think so. It was it was donated to the Smithsonian, so it's kind of a little piece of history that kind of worked its way into this. But there were a lot of other puppets used in the sequence.
Pillsbury Doughboy.
Pillsbury Doughboy.
Which again, not a George Powell creation, but inspired by George Powell. Right?
And the animators that did Pillsbury worked for George on Puppetoons. Later on, ended up doing Pillsbury Doughboy. Of course, the voice of the Pillsbury Doughboy is Paul Frees, who was the voice for Arnie the Dinosaur and all the characters in the Puppetoon movie. He also narrated the fantasy film worlds of George Powell. And And many of you know, I'm sure your listeners know, that Paul Frees is the voice of the ghost host in the Haunted Mansion.
Of the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland. Yeah.
Disneyland. He's a huge voice of all the Disney films.
Well,
he also is the voice of the films that George Powell made. in the time machine this way, the talking rings, the opening of War of the Worlds. Paul Frees was one of the great voice actors of history, and he had a big part in the Puppetoon movie. In fact, the film is dedicated to Paul.
Right.
Last
Yeah.
project he did before he died. And
Which is what's so wonderful that you got to work with him.
it was an honor to have met him, and he was a remarkable man, and he just gave of himself freely to me. He was quite remarkable. But there's so many stories of so many of these icons that were involved. The Disney studios became involved in the project. I mean, once Roy Disney became a friend of mine for years after this, he opened up the studio to me. I used their Oxbury animation stand in the animation department to do a lot of the photography for the fantasy film worlds. I became friends with people at the studio. Buddy Baker, who did the music for the Puppetoon movie.
Yes.
And you know, Buddy was the composer of on Zorro, on the Wonderful World of
projects
Disney.
at Disney, right? Yeah.
Every Disney project Buddy did the music for, not to mention Disneyland, Haunted Mansion, Pirates of the Caribbean. I mean, you name it. So that was quite extraordinary, getting Buddy involved. The whole thing, all the different aspects of the opening sequence had all these interconnections. You had Gumby, you had Pokey, you had all these other characters, and I thought that for the average person who maybe wasn't familiar with the Puppetoons, Gumby would be a good way to introduce them by being a bit unaware. And the way I wrote it was he was just not familiar with all the connections. Now, you know, I kind of painted the picture that Arnie the dinosaur revealed to him George Powell and who he was. And it's a funny sequence for that reason. It's fantasy, of course, but I thought it was an interesting way to do it.
How did you decide what shorts that you were going to include in the first film?
I was restricted for a number of reasons. I picked the films that Mrs. Powell had helped me. She had all the nitrates at the time. There were rights issues with a number of the films that I have now overcome with this release that we're going to talk about over 35 years later.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, it's a lifetime project, really. It's an epic story because at the time the rights were tied up. I couldn't use all the Puppetoons I wanted to. Fortunately, a number of them are in the public domain. Tubby the Tuba, John Henry and the Inky Poo, Tulip Show Grow. Some of the Europeans aren't, but I was able to get permission to use a few of those. And so the selection was limited by a certain rights issue that I really couldn't overcome. And it wasn't, and I was after trying to do it for many, many years to try to release more of the films, but the films were owned by different companies. And and believe me, I tried over the years. I even tried with Mrs. Powell helping me to get these cleared, but I couldn't. And so it wasn't until, really, honestly, until 3 or 4 years ago that Paramount became involved with the Puppetoons again. They were made by Paramount, but they lost the rights to it. And it became the rights with other companies. And it just fortuitously came back to Paramount.
Okay.
And at that point, I contacted Paramount, and it took many, many years. And finally, the chairman, Jim Giannopoulos, who is the chairman of Paramount, which was another amazing story, said I could do it. And by the way, it happened on the day that you saw the TCM show. Jim Giannopoulos was doing a show a sequence in the afternoon with Ben on the motion picture home for the Academy, the motion picture home, not the Academy, the motion picture home for actors and people in Los Angeles. And he's a big contributor to that. And so I was able to make the connection to him because I was there doing my sequence. And then I connected later on. And it took about 1.5 years after that. And he finally said, okay.
Okay.
It's amazing.
Isn't that amazing, Arnie? So one of the things that really struck me about the films that you included in the 1987 Puppetoon movie was just the cinematic nature of it. And then I was just so wowed by what was going on technically, even if I couldn't necessarily understand it. I could tell that I was just watching something really special. Each pose was getting moved. They had like separate pieces. And it really fascinated me. Could you tell us some about just the technical marvel that is that makes up these Puppetoon shorts?
I think I will. Let me do it this way. A lot of people ask, how did George come up with this idea to do replacement figures? And the answer to it was he was an animator. He used to do cell animation. This was in 1930s, 1931, 32. He was doing cell animation. And he said that he was so bored drawing cells of animation. He was playing with a three-dimensional object. Let's assume this pen is a cigarette. He smoked. A lot of people smoke. So Mrs. Powell told me the story, but he was playing around with a cigarette in his hand, and he started to think, and he started to animate it kind of in his hand. He was kind of moving it around, right? And he came up with the idea of taking cigarettes and animating them. So they were first done as cell animation. He called up the sponsor and he said, what do you think if I use your own cigarettes? Your trademark will be on every one of them. And the sponsor loved the idea. So he started to animate cigarettes to music and to stories. He put little heads on them, mouths so they could talk, legs so they could walk. He eventually, as he explains it, he took the flat cartoon and turned it into 3-dimension. That was his invention. The idea of doing a replacement figure came about where instead of just one figure, he came up with this almost insane, by today's standards, it's incredulous, where thousands of puppets were created, different heads, different legs, different bodies, and they were replaced each frame of film, just like you would do in a cell. You would move the animation just a little bit. So George came up with these elaborate director sheets. And the animators, the Puppetoon animators that I got to know before they passed away, told me they were unbelievable. He created the whole movie in his head before a single frame of film was shot. It would be laid out on director sheets. Every move of the head, the eyeball, the leg, the movement, frame by frame by frame. And an animator, even a person who isn't that experienced, could actually follow his director sheets and animate without ever knowing how to animate. It was all kind of by the numbers. And it's remarkable because he did it, he had this all, as Ray Harryhausen explained it to me, because he, by the way, got his first job working at the Puppetoons. George hired Ray as an 18-year-old animator. He had never done animation before. George hired Ray to do Puppetoons. And Puppetoons that I have in my next release some of them are Ray Harryhausen animated. But he would hire a person off the street to animate. And they would follow the numbers and they would animate these figures.
Mm-hmm. Because now they have 3D printers that help them with all those faces, like Leica and places like that. And to think of them doing that all hand by
All
hand
by
is
hand, I know. It just
pretty
boggles my
incredible.
mind.
It's thousands of
Arnie,
them framed, but yeah.
what was the size of kind of the average size of the crew that was working that would work on a Puppetoon short?
Well, he had quite a large studio. There were several, by the way. He did the Europe first.
Okay.
He had the largest stop motion animation facility in Europe, the first of its kind. He was called the Walt Disney of Europe, even back in the 1930s. And he had about 100 animators and craftsmen working at the studio. And when he left Holland after a number of years, and some of those shorts I have in this new release too, that have never been seen before, he got the attention of Paramount Pictures, and that's how he made Puppetoons in Hollywood. And he also had a big studio, Puppetoon Studios, and there were at least that many people working in Hollywood. He had all kinds of crew and craftsmen, people, woodworkers and doll makers, and all these amazing people from all over the world. Powell brought in, he was talk about diversity, because today diversity is such a big thing. Powell was hiring everyone at that time that nobody was doing. He had people from other countries. He had different races, different languages, different people from all over the world were working on the Puppetoons. These amazing craftsmen from Europe, people from Mexico, people from all countries. And of course, there was a lot of black as well, many black performers, actors, musicians. So George was really a forerunner of diversity, and women. A lot of women worked at the Puppetoon studios. A lot of women animators, women that did work with the puppets, worked in the office, worked in animation. Most people don't know that. So the style of the Puppetoons, the series puppet, is really is George's basic big idea of being able to take a series of figures and animating them in a fluid way. And when you look at the Puppetoons, you see a style of animation that is unlike anything that has ever been done before.
Yeah.
It has a fluidity to it and a style. It's so beautiful.
It is. They're so beautiful. They're so cinematic. I was so impressed with the lighting and just the set design, if that's what you can call it for the puppet sets they're creating is just tremendous,
And they were all done. Duke Goldstone was the supervisor of the studio. He directed a couple of the shorts, including Jasper and a Jam, which you saw in the Puppetoon movie. He was a very, very dear friend of mine till he passed away, and he ended up working with George on some of his feature films. But he told me that these people came, these woodworkers and these amazing people. They would make all the sets. The sets would be built on a miniature. It's a miniature studio. It's a studio, and just like we did with the Puppetoon movie, it's all a miniature set. And if you had a street that was maybe 6 feet long, it would have picket fences and sidewalks and lampposts and a house and windows in it. And if it required a piano, they would make a piano like this big, and the piano would have all the keys in it. It wasn't like today where you would just make a prop. These woodworkers, these animators, they would make a full size piano that was this big, that had all the keys in it, all the strings in it. It was like literally replicating a piano. They were so meticulous.
That's so amazing. Yeah, that level of detail, and you can just really tell, when you're watching the shorts. How would you what's your take on Powell's influence on today's stop motion animation filmmakers? Did Henry Selick and some of these other folks, did they get to meet George? How did that work, Arnie? And how was that continuum of the art form?
Well, they all were influenced by George. No, they didn't.
Oh, yeah,
they didn't get to
absolutely.
meet George themselves. You mentioned Henry Selick, Tim Burton. I was involved at an early stage because the Puppetoon movie had come out in 1987. And it was really the first time that anyone had really ever seen the Puppetoons, because they had not been really generally seen for many decades, and certainly not the way they're seen in the Puppetoon movie, the way they're supposed to be seen, and even more so today with the new version. So a lot of these animators and people saw the Puppetoon movie during that period. And Tim Burton was one, and Henry Selick was one. And so when they did Nightmare Before Christmas, as an example, Disney had me there. I was at the studio when they made Nightmare Before Christmas. All the animators, when I came in, they all were like so complimentary about the Puppetoon movie because they all used it as a template for Nightmare Before Christmas. Because that was a series puppet film. That was a series, the first modern series puppet film that had ever been done. And so the Puppetoons absolutely were the influence of Nightmare Before Christmas, of all the Henry Selick films you see. Claymation, the fellow that did Claymation. These are all George Powell fans. Leica today, you mentioned Leica. George Powell is the influence for Leica. They freely admit all this. So yes, there's a very big connection.
A really strong connection. Well,
all of them.
We are excited to talk about your next big project, which is, if I'm getting the title right, Arnie, the Puppetoon movie Volume 2.
Yes.
And tell us about this. Here it is 30 plus years later, and you're able now to put together another big compilation of these films. Tell us about this project and how it differs, or even how it's the same from your 1987 compilation film.
Of it probably would be a good idea. The trailer really shows it pretty well. It tells you what it is. It's all visual. It's no narration. It's just
there's no. That was interesting to me, Arnie. And tell us about that decision. With the trailer that you went just with no narration.
No, it's like the people there's a core group of people, and there's a lot of them that have followed the Puppetoons. The people that bought the Puppetoon movie, the first one that's on Blu-ray, are a lot of the people that are coming on board here, and it's being followed by the animation industry very closely, and the people that do these films. And so words are really not necessary. It's not for the average person. In most cases, the Puppetoons have a niche. It's an audience that knows them. How wide it goes, I don't know. But I think it speaks for itself in terms of the animation, and that's part of the idea of it. You asked me how it happened, and well, over the past 30 years, I've been trying to put together more Puppetoons. And so over the course of, say, the last 5 to 10 years, some of these European subjects started turning up. And that's when I realized, well, this would be nice. They haven't been seen. And I was able to get original negatives, or at least nitrate prints on some of those films.
Oh, wow.
And they came out of Europe. Some of these had never been seen before. And I searched archives around the world, the British Film Institute. I actually came up with some amazing discoveries of films that had never been seen since the 1930s. And they were original negatives. They didn't even know they had them. And it was quite a archaeological film find to be able to do this.
Yes.
And then the Paramount films became available. And when the Paramount films became available, that was a breakthrough, because then I could go back to the original negatives. Paramount has them all the original successive negatives of the Puppetoons exist in vaults. And so for a number of them, we actually went back to the original successive 3-strip Technicolor negatives and scanned them. So the quality of them are incomparable, because it's like looking at them as glass. It's like, it's so perfect. There is when you see them in the Puppetoon movie, a number of them, they look like they were just made yesterday. And the Technicolor quality, because they were shot in Technicolor, the color and the clarity is mind-boggling.
I was really impressed with that in the trailer. I just thought, the clarity, as you mentioned, and it just looked like such beautiful prints you were able to, however you did it. So what was the average condition of these, Arnie? I mean, or maybe best or worst or something. I'm not sure the best way to ask that question, but it's just the condition of the prints that you were able to find.
Did you have to restore any of them?
Yeah, they were all restored. All the 35, they were 35 millimeter nitrate prints many of them came from Europe, and they were scanned in Europe.
Okay.
Some of them came from the Library of Congress here in the United States. And all the ones that I use for the film are mint condition nitrate prints. So they're almost flawless in most respects. The ones from Paramount that are the negatives are, words can't even describe how gorgeous they are. And we have a number of them, and you will see them. They've never been seen this way, not even when they were first shown in movie theaters. And you all realize these were shown in movie theaters with films in the 1940s, and it was a big deal. When the Puppetoon came on a screen in 1941, 2, 3, 4, whatever, the audience applauded because they were waiting for Puppetoons. You have to remember, no one had ever seen anything like it in the country. You had animation, and then suddenly it's stop motion animation in 3-dimension for the audience.
Technicolor.
Technicolor. It was a revelation in 1940s. No one ever saw anything like this. Today it's more common because you have CGI and all that's happened. It wasn't like that in 1940, but by comparison, these are better than anything done today. No comparison.
That's
better. Flat out better than anything you can compare to today, which is so remarkable.
What special features, if you could share, have you added to this Blu-ray set?
Well, aside from 18, it's got 18 restored Puppetoons.
Okay.
In high definition. And in addition, there's some extras. There's a 22-minute all Puppetoon film that Powell made for the Shell Oil Company that's never been seen before. That's going to be included here. And a lot of people have been asked about this film for years, and I was able to find it. It was another one of these unbelievable discoveries. It's just one discovery after the other. Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, I think we mentioned.
Yes, you and I talked about that on the phone.
From 1935, and that's never been seen. It's probably some of the greatest stop motion animation ever done. And then there's some extras. My 2 interviews with Joe Dante's Trailers from Hell are there. The Miles one, the thing with Speedy, is on there. There's a Puppetoon movie montage I put together, which is sort of a history of PAL in pictures and visuals like the trailer. And there's also full production credit, crawl. Plus we have donors, a lot of people contributed. Without their help, it would never be fully possible to make the project happen. And I give credit to every donor of the film who contributed to the film, and it's a long list in the credits. So the credit crawl is very important because it's a historical document. It lists all the animators that worked on the Puppetoons, the original Puppetoons, all the musicians, the music that was used. It has it's almost a scholarly work because it has the whole history there. So that was very important. There's also a booklet. There's liner notes that I wrote it's quite involved, detailed for the very first time. The voice actors, the production company, all the detail of every Puppetoon has been researched. So it's all laid out for the first time. So it's for future generations to be able to use this. So in a way, it's an educational, has great educational value for schools, for animation schools, and everywhere. So
that's great.
Yeah. Arnie, tell us about where our listeners can pre-order a copy of it, and tell us a little bit more about maybe your release plans for this new.
Yeah, when's it available?
Well, it's going to be, my hope is December is the time it'll be released. And it's going to be easy for people to find it because it's puppetoon.net. So it's easy. You just put puppetoon.net in your browser. It'll take you right to the page.
And you can pre-order. I was looking at it today. Yeah.
Right there. And it's as easy as could be. And it's up now. And there have been quite a few people have come to it so far. I'm actually somewhat surprised because I haven't really discussed it. I had put the trailer up on YouTube, not so much to promote it, but I was trying to get the connectivity to the page. I had some technical issues I had to deal with, and I just put it up there. But what are you going to do? You put it on YouTube. What do you expect? I mean, suddenly the whole world knows about it.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited. I mean, it's gotten like a couple of, it looks like 1,000, 1,500 hits in only 4 or 5 days. And, people are finding it somehow. So I'm thrilled. I hope they come. I hope more people will come to see it.
Yeah. So you want to watch the trailer together?
Yeah. Let's watch
All right. Let's do it. Very fun.
Beautiful. Again, just so wowed by the clarity and just the vivid colors, and it just really looks beautiful, Arnie. I'm really excited.
I just wanted to let our audio listeners know, we'll put a link down if people want to. You just heard the music, so but if you want to watch the trailer, we'll have a link in so that you can watch it while you're while you're listening to the podcast.
Oh, thank
Sorry,
you.
but go ahead.
I was going to say that a lot of people ask me about Bugs Bunny in it.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about Bugs Bunny.
It's the first time Bugs was loaned to a studio outside of Warner Brothers, and he appeared in only a couple of things throughout the decades. The only time he really appeared with live action and animation was Roger Rabbit. Before then, he was mostly animated in a couple of appearances, but this is the first time he was ever used. It's ever been allowed. And Bugs is in the sequence in Jasper Goes Hunting, and it's the first time it was ever animated with stop motion. So it's stop motion animated and Bugs Bunny at the same time. And so that's gotten the attention of a huge swath of the animation world.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're seeing this for the first time.
That's such a unique.
That's big. And the other thing is Superman.
Powell
got the permission of DC Comics during the time when the Fleischer Supermans were being done. And this is the first use of Superman, again, outside of DC Comics, which rarely ever happened. And Punchy is in a Superman outfit and he flies and he does the whole thing with the bullet and the train and whole deal.
Okay.
So that's a couple of little interesting star turn moments.
Some things to look forward to when we finally get to watch it. Are there any other distribution plans for an Arnie, or has COVID kind of shut down some of the stuff that you maybe had planned to do?
Well, you're right. I was on the phone with Jerry Beck, who has Cartoon Research.
Yes.
Well known. Jerry's been a friend of mine for almost as long as I've been making these films. And we discussed this. Obviously it has a lot of application in a lot of settings that we could show these films, universities, TCM.
Oh yeah.
Different cinematochs. The Museum of Modern Art has been wanting to do this for a long time.
Oh yeah.
But now, with the virus, you and I know the situation. It's going to take some time. So it's not a problem. The Puppetoons have been around for 100 years, and they'll be around for another 100 years.
That's right.
You know what I mean? It's not going to matter. They'll be around, and people will be just as interested in it 5 years from now as 25 years ago. So there'll be a time and a place where we'll be able to do some really great things. And I would love to be there. I'd love to do it. If I'm well and I can do it, I'd love to do it. So for now, we're doing it remotely.
Yeah.
Do
you have like social media for it or anything like that? Do you want to share?
Well, the only social media I have is a Facebook support group.
Okay.
I can give you that link. It's a support
That'd be great.
Puppetoon movie on Facebook. I've got about 1,500 members. There's a Puppetoon movie too on Facebook also. I haven't been posting yet. I haven't even posted the trailer on that page yet. I posted it on the support page, but I will post it. But yes, I'm be thrilled if you both of you were to utilize social media in any way to get the word out, because I'm not as technically savvy as many of you are.
Yeah.
And
we can do that, no problem.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was really fun.
Thank you so much for all of your time and for this wonderful labor of love that you have, that you put together. We're really excited about it.
I really appreciate you, Stan, in particular. Not in deference to Rachel. I haven't been talking to Stan, and I'm so impressed by your enthusiasm and your interest. Both of you, I really am. I'm very impressed by both of you. It's a great. You're a great asset to the animation community, and I really think we'll go far. I think both of you will go far.
Well, thank you. That's very, very nice.
That's so kind of you.
And So we'll have all the information for everything for the trailer, for everything to learn more in the description section. And Stanford, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Stanford Clark, and I have a movie blog and podcast at moviespastandpresent.com.
Great. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So please check that out. Also check me out over at rotoscopers.com where I'll definitely try to do something over there with all this, maybe do a DVD review or something like that when it comes out. And that's where you can get all of your Animation Addicts coverage over there at Rotoscopers. So lots of good stuff. Thank you again, Arnie. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Arnie.
And hopefully maybe we can catch up again another time.
Yeah, we'll do it again as we progress. It'd be great.
Oh, absolutely.
God bless you.
Let us know your questions down below, and we'll talk to you all later. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.